Welcome to the WORKOLOGY podcast, where we discuss the science and art of the workplace, gain powerful insights, resources, and perspectives on the industries of human resources and recruiting. Join your host, Jessica Miller-Merrill, chief blogger of bloggingforjobs.com, for an in-depth and no-holds-barred look into the future of our most powerful business asset, the employee. And now, welcome your host, Jessica, with this podcast episode of WORKOLOGY.
I'm here today with John Baldino. He's the president of Humoriso and works specifically in the areas of talent management and workforce planning, among other things in the consulting arena. Welcome to the WORKOLOGY podcast.
Thank you, Jessica. Glad to be here.
We're going to talk a little bit today about workforce planning and just some basics, maybe for senior leaders or HR folks who are listening on the podcast who haven't yet thought about how to incorporate that into their business strategy.
Yeah.
Can you walk us through basically what workforce planning is in your mind first, just to give us some foundation?
Sure. I think from a basic standpoint, it's important, again, to be very simple. Where you are as an organization, where you want to be, and how you're going to get there. If people can keep those three basic concepts sort of in mind as they start to look at the business strategy, as they look at their talent, where they're getting their talent from, it actually helps to keep things pretty in line. And workforce planning is that. Simply, that's what it is.
Well, I would think that workforce planning is something that we should think about, or maybe we're doing it or considering it, but we haven't labeled it as such, especially if our organization is growing or we're dealing maybe with a competitive talent landscape.
Yeah, I mean, classically, what winds up getting focused on more than anything else is talent management, right? So talent management is a piece of workforce planning, but we spend an awful amount of time, not awful in a bad way, but we don't really consider sort of the bookends of workforce planning, which would be your business strategy considerations and your staffing strategy considerations. When it's just talent management, it's sort of off kilter then. Too heavy.
Yeah, you're just focused on one part of the whole entire employment
Exactly.
life cycle.
Exactly. And so when people begin to sort of overemphasize one over the other, then we get very narrow. Even in talent management, we start to, again, drill down there, and you look at succession planning. Very hot topic. People talk about it a lot. Succession planning does not make sense out of the context of the whole.
As a marketer, somebody who writes about a lot of these topics, I think that a lot of the content out there is driven by sort of buzzwords and vendor speak, which, that's business that we work and live in. But how do you kind of cut across the noise around that? Because I feel like there's a lot of misinformation about maybe what workforce planning is, or even succession planning, like these pieces.
Yeah, I mean, it's a great question, because a lot of times it is sort of pulling people back to step one and saying, let's unpack that definition, right? Because we're using interchangeably, for example, like we're talking about talent management and workforce planning, as if they're the same. It is a lot of dialogue and a lot of conversation, as you can imagine, and on the executive level. Often the buzzwords, to your point, become all that they have time to really cull. So they hear talent management talked about a lot, and therefore that must be what it is. And if they're not being sort of directed by their VP of HR or another senior person within the HR department to help them understand how that works, it doesn't surprise me that sort of continues over and over and over again.
Yeah, if they maybe read The Economist or Harvard Business Review, pick up a nice spread on workplace planning or talent management, they believe that this is all that it incorporates.
Yeah, and when you say things like, well, let's talk about business strategy, for example, sometimes you'll sit with, again, that leadership team, and they'll say, well, our mission is this. Because, again, business strategy includes mission, but that's not all that there is to it. But when people just fixate on one component, if you fixate on business strategy being mission and workforce planning being talent management, then you're just drawing the line from mission to talent management only. That's important, but it's certainly not all of it.
So let's say that we're a senior HR leader and we want to start out in workforce planning, but now we need to sort of re-educate our business leaders. How do we do that?
Yeah, I mean, simply, I think that you start at step one, right? Where are we? And as basic as that may sound, if you can approach where are we in a business strategy sense, right? Are we where we want to be? Probably not. Are we on the path to where we want to be? That's a very robust conversation that you can have with somebody. Once you sort of drill down on that, where are we hitting the marks, where are we not, then you start to lay a foundation for, okay, and what does our talent look like in connection to that? And where does our staffing need to change as a result of examining our talent?
So you're talking about 3 main steps in workforce planning. So kind of walk us through those steps.
Yeah, I mean, again, the first step is your business strategy. That's step 1. And business strategy really from the sense of, again, not just mission, but what are we doing to make inroads competitively? What's the market doing, right? So a basic market analysis. Don't think that you're too good for a market analysis. I tell the story of that strategy doesn't necessarily need to be rocket science. For example, years ago, McDonald's used to spend a fortune on market analysis, and they would send people all over the country. Where does it make sense? Where doesn't it make sense for us to open? Burger King used to do the same thing. Until Burger King realized we can just piggyback on what McDonald's is doing. And that's why when you drive around often, a Burger King is not that far from a McDonald's, because they piggybacked off of what McDonald's was already spending money on. That was a smart business strategy. They were getting the job done, but were wise about how to get that done. That's what I mean by business strategy. If you can't start looking at sort of some of those nuances, then moving into a talent management step, I think you're off kilter. You spend a lot of time trying to plug holes that you think are needed that really may not be needed. You didn't need this whole market analysis team, and I'm not looking to get people fired. That's not the point of this, but at least Burger King, whether you like them or not, was smart about the way in which they use their resources and were wise about talent. And then they moved into a staffing strategy, right, as a third step to look and say, okay, how do we now get what we're missing? Because if we can't grow our own, and we don't have the resources to do it, we need to start looking outside of that and how we look at staffing.
I find like the interesting thing about the case study that you're describing with McDonald's and Burger King is that Burger King said, like, hey, I can't compete with McDonald's in their market share, like being first to market or to dominate the space. But I do realize that if McDonald's says that there's an opportunity here, that people are going to want variety and choices, and we can provide that.
Absolutely, right? So if you've, especially for those of us who travel as much, especially if you're on the road, right? So when you pull off an exit and there's a McDonald's and you're hungry, right? And there's the drive-through line that, of course, we're not going to get out and go in because welcome to America. So you're going to want to get in that drive-through line, and it's too long. And Burger King is, you can see it, and nobody's there. You will settle for the Whopper rather than the Big Mac. You will. I know the fries are better at McDonald's, but you will make yourself be okay with the ones at Burger King because you want the expediency of trying to get through. I just need to eat something.
I guess think about that for employees and staffing, right?
Yeah.
And building those relationships. You don't, as an employee, you don't. If you've already worked at McDonald's, right? You're looking for a new opportunity, some variety. You're going to look at Burger King as an opportunity, and maybe companies should think about that in their staffing planning and workforce planning also.
Absolutely, and that's where you really get into putting some thoughtfulness when it comes to the staffing strategy into competencies. What does it really take to do the work that we know needs to be done? Not necessarily what the job description has said for the last 20 years, but really what does it take to get it done? You've got to look at what the input is measured up against what the real output has been, not the annual performance review that sort of is just a three-box checklist. That's not what this is about when it's really strategic, right? That's more administrative. Be strategic. Are we hitting the objectives that we really need to hit? If you can't measure some of that, then that's a big problem. And to use, again, not that you and I work for the fast food restaurant world, right? But if you look at those examples, Burger King actually then started to cull talent from McDonald's because those folks knew what they could do in the McDonald's world and just brought it over to Burger King. And Burger King had a very simple staffing strategy at that point. Try to get some of those people who understand the market analysis that we're honestly ripping off and making it work. And they did. And they still do.
I'm of the belief that there's not a really original business idea, right?
Yeah,
it's just people who execute better.
Right.
So Burger King understands that, right? And I think most retailers, companies, Marriott, Hilton, Embassy Suites, whoever it is, they are dealing with those kinds of situations every single day.
Yeah, I mean, retail is a great example of that. And you and I have a great friend in Vittorio Milian, and you know, Vittorio started in his career at H&M. I shouldn't say started. Had his longest stint, I'll say, in HR at H&M. And that was a retailer when he was there that was very new in the American market. And retail is retail, so many people think. And yet, in the 8 years that he was there, their market share grew tremendously. Why? Is it just about price point? I don't think so, because you can go to Walmart and buy clothes if that's really all it's about is price point. It's about being effective, again, from a business strategy, being effective to show style in simple lines, simple choices, and they found a whole audience of people that would gel with that because of the work that they put into it. Not only from an audience of purchasers, but an audience of talent to choose from. And that's unusual in retail. It wasn't just an hourly job while I'm going to college. It's they kind of know what I'm like, and they're using those talents and skills, the KSAs, right, competencies, all whatever the verbiage is you want to use. They learned how to tap into that and made sense in America.
It's a lifestyle choice, right? Too, to work for a company like that, you're making a statement about who you are as a person and the type of beliefs that you have or don't have.
Yeah, absolutely. And if we don't sort of cultivate that perspective around the business strategy, again, I keep coming back to step one because I think that's where we miss it so often, then your talent is not going to be aligned to that strategy because they think they're just getting a job done rather than really seeing the bigger picture in this small piece that I do. How does that take advantage in a good way of my competencies? How do they take advantage of my rapport development? Those things are huge because communication really is key in a lot of the businesses that I get to work with, you know, that you've experienced. It isn't just here's the memo, make sure everybody knows it. Communication in its dynamic sense.
What do you think about the rise of importance and just thought around employment branding? So in terms of like when you're looking at workforce planning, does that play an important role in what you guys are doing? I feel like it's really kind of a fluffy space right now because there isn't a lot of numbers behind it. Yeah, and I was just going to say that. The tough thing about branding is the metric behind it, right? I think that people, it's like SEO optimization. I just had this conversation with the CEO the other day, and I said, it's great that you have an increase in optimization. And I appreciate that there is actually a metric to that you can see how much fewer people, I should say, have bounced from your site that are staying and actually clicking through to the next page. That's fantastic. How many more sales have you gotten as a result of that? Right? How many more applications have you gotten for open positions that have you gotten as a result of that? Well, I'm not sure. Because we got happy at the one metric that said, woohoo, our SEO is up, right? We're number 3 on the first page of Google. That's great, but what is it getting you to? And I think that, again, coming back to what you've asked about branding, how narrow is your bucket for what branding really is? Some people are very happy to be branded as a community supporter, right? As involved with nonprofits in the area. If that's what they've been happy with, it may be more difficult to sort of measure what that brand has now given them. I would say the jury's still out for me as to how much effort goes into branding. I think obviously from a smart PR standpoint, you do need to think about what your brand is and what it says. But don't ever just sort of become drowned in that as that is your business strategy. I look at a company like Google that I mentioned, and it may surprise you what I'm about to say, because what I'm focused on, when you can make your company name become a verb, that's branding, right? When you can refer to a tissue as a Kleenex and everybody knows what you're talking about, then Kleenex has done a great job with branding. Xerox, when it's a verb, when it is the main descriptor of something, then talk to me. That's extremely hard, I think, in the hiring and recruiting space or employee engagement space or retention. Like, I don't know if anybody's ever accomplished that feat. So
there's not many, right? There's not many that have done that. And I'm being a little tongue-in-cheek, but my point really is when you sit with someone from a talent acquisition standpoint, and your goal is to impress them with this is who we are as a brand, that's when I think you slip into this is our ping pong table, here's our beer meister, here, and it becomes about, see, we're this hip, cool company, right? So I'll really date myself, that sort of Steve Martin, wild and crazy guy kind of perspective, right? But that only lasts for so long, right? Everybody's had those drunken night hookups that seemed great at that night, and then you wake up the next morning and it's like, what the heck, right? So it wasn't enough to just have, the all-night dance party and whatever else went on. It's not enough.
Well, let's talk a little bit about competencies. Why are these important in workforce planning? What makes this different than maybe other areas of human resources or recruiting or just business strategy?
Yeah, I would say one of the things that I see as falling a bit statistically is the level of measurement around competencies. So we might be quick to do sort of an initial psychological overview. Ann Taylor as an entity, before you can get a job in any of their brands, whether it's Ann Taylor, Loft, even the factory store, they take a psychological assessment. And if you don't pass that assessment, it's a quick one, you don't go any further. That's it, right? There's less companies, obviously, that out there that are doing that than those that just need to bypass that because they just need bodies. But there is something to be said about some level of measurement. And when it comes to competencies, we sometimes find ourselves from a talent management, which moves into a staffing strategy as the third step, watering down the role that's really needed to uplift the business strategy that we've just affirmed and worked so hard to get down. When you have to water down the talent because you really can't expect that much, most times we let the competencies go. We just put them to the side and say, well, it's a workaround. Well, we'll just have the manager handle that for them now because we don't have enough people that can do that. I think we sell ourselves short. There are people out there who either have the capability right now and just need to be trained, or who actually have the competencies and don't even realize it. I'll give you a great example. There was an organization that we had the opportunity to do some work for, and they wanted to get started on a new vertical in their business space. They didn't want to increase payroll, really. They wanted to figure out ways in which, perhaps with whom they have internally, could they make it work? And so we were able to do some diagnostics, and through competency assessments, this one perfect department had folks in it that were working at about 80% capacity, doing a great job, nothing wrong with the work they were doing, but they were at about 80%. And two folks in that department had skills that could be transferable and enhanced to handle this new vertical. And the department that was left behind went from 80% capacity to 92 to 95% capacity. Well, you pay people for 100% capacity, so we're still doing pretty well. And it was all a matter of assessment. And I think we have to be wise with that because there are significant industries struggling with talent, finding the right talent. And I think that if we start measuring competencies a little stronger, yes, I understand that keeps the talent pool narrow, but it doesn't get you off track from what you're trying to accomplish.
I like that you're talking about analyzing and measuring and understanding internal talent, right?
Yeah.
Because I don't think that's something that we really do a great job of. We like to look at solving the problem, looking for outside resources.
Agreed.
Instead of maybe looking in first.
And I would also say one of the things that we're very guilty of, and I don't care if you're a 25-person company or a 25,000-person company, you look and find who's willing rather than who can. And there are people who are willing to do, we have wonderful people that work for us, right, in many organizations. And just because they're willing, you can ask them to do these other things and they will, does not mean that they are the most competent to do it. And so we've exchanged, again, some of the desire around competencies for a willingness, and that's not the same thing. And we've done a disservice to some of those folks who look back after 10 or 15 years of staying with the company, which is really abnormally long in the life cycle of an employee today, and they look back and think, I've been taken advantage of. I was willing to do all this and I did it, but where am I today? And I'm leaving here and I'm paid well, I'm going to have a hard time finding that kind of pay rate wherever I'm going to go, but I know that I'm kind of burned out because I've been allowed to do so much without someone really coming up alongside of me and coaching me through it to say, this is where you sit. It's such a wonderful place to be. Here's how we can enhance those skills. Here's how your aptitudes could be better displayed, to your point, and really invest in our own talent, because we really want to keep these people longer. A less than 4-year, average for someone staying in their job is tough to make work for sort of your holistic workforce plans.
What do you say to like Silicon Valley, kind of the mindset? I lived there for a couple years, and I just felt like everything was just hard and fast. But also, tenure is really 12 to 18 months over there.
Yeah.
I mean, people are looking for their next play.
Yep. And so, what do I say? A whole lot that I probably couldn't say here. But one of the things that I say for sure is, then maybe we should give some thought to the contractor perspective rather than the employee perspective, and maintain the integrity of an employment relationship as something special and set apart, rather than calling everybody an employee when you know in 12 months they're going to leave.
Sure.
Right? Start them in a 12-month engagement as a consultant contractually, and see what happens from there, because they should be able to see a difference between the way they're invested in versus how you actually invest in employees that have made a commitment. And I know it's not, clean. You still can have employees that leave in 12 to 18 months. I respect that. But that comes from the leadership to say, I'm not sure about this one. I love his or her skill set, and I think we could use it. Let's use it for 6 to 12 months and make some decisions after that.
Well, and two, your mindset is shifted, right, beyond just the ping pong table and the foosball and the beer Fridays.
Right.
And you're looking at things, it sounds like, more holistically.
Yes, absolutely. And that's not a bad thing.
One of the things that we talked about before we hit record was we talked about the virtual workforce.
Yes.
And maybe different competencies that we might need to be considering. Talk a little bit about that.
It is probably the new wave of consideration around competency assessment, because some of what has been done in previous competency provided tools that are out there, and there's many that are good, but a lot of them are connected not only to a measurement of skill set, sort of a check the box type thing, but some of them are connected to interaction. And interaction is a lot different when you are at an office together, even for a portion of the day or of the week, versus never. And we have so many organizations that are never together physically. They do the hangout thing, they'll do the Zoom meeting, whatever technology it is that you're using. There is something to be said about the facade, and I don't necessarily mean that negatively, but the facade around, okay, hey, I'm in front of my screen now, we've got a 25-minute meeting around this. We get what we need to get done, and then we're gone because we all are efficient people and we have to keep working. You don't pick up that sort of relational body language, real facial expression, the slouching of the shoulders, the sighs that happen from cubicles, that happen around conference tables, that won't happen as much when it comes to hangout. I'm not saying it won't ever, but you lose out on some of those ways that you'll measure people. And so everyone, especially in the transition between sort of your traditional workplace to a more flexible staffing kind of workplace, some folks don't know how to follow along with that. Everybody just sort of seems distant. And I don't know how to figure out what they're good at or what they're not good at. I don't even know the questions to ask because I don't feel like I even know this person. I don't know anything about their kids. I don't know anything because we got comfortable with being relational at that level. Right or wrong, that's what we got comfortable with. I think the next wave you're going to see is figuring out ways to assess competencies when it's devoid of sort of the tangible relational aspect that we've allowed, that we typically have.
I'm taking notes because I'm working remote in my new role, and as a senior leader, like that's in my mind like a huge challenge. Those relationships, engagement, just sort of understanding the nuances of people and doing that from 1,000 miles away.
Yeah, and I don't think you're alone, right? I mean, honestly, I think there's a lot more organizations. And my picking on this isn't to say I think it should change. Quite honestly, I don't. I think there's a lot of benefit around it as well. I think it depends on the industry and organization. But I'm not saying throw the baby out with the bathwater. What I am saying, though, is I think we need to perhaps be more thoughtful about some of what that relational interaction looks like, so that when you have a hangout or a Zoom meeting or join me, you say, okay, we're going to hear from Jim, right, for the next 7 minutes before we jump into this. And I asked Jim to talk a little bit about because I found out Jim did Little League. You know, Jim, what are the things that you remember most about Little League, and is there anything that might be applicable to the way that we run our team today? It is still work related, I get that, but you're giving Jim a chance to kind of show his personality, yes, through a screen, but watch his face, you know, when he decides to share certain memories from that Little League. There's a psychological component to that. And again, I'm picking on Little League. It could be dance, it could be the play, it could be, you know, whatever it is. I mean, I grew up in a completely stereotypical 100% Italian household from Philadelphia. If you've watched Rocky, like, that's my entire family all the time. They're funny memories, right? Because you're going to talk to people who are living 1,000 miles away, who have no frame of reference. They watched Rocky, they watched Moonstruck, they saw The Godfather, that's what they think Italians are like, and then they hear from me, right? And they're making some connections to the schemata they've got in their files in their brains, to something that's real. And now I, as the sharer, feel a bit more connected, albeit 1,000 miles away, but to this team that I'm working with.
I wish you guys could see the podcast interview, because he's extremely Italian and with his hands. So, and I'm sitting here thinking, like, as much as I love podcasting, you just don't get that from a face-to-face conversation or something where you're talking on the telephone.
Right. And that's where I think that, again, utilizing the technology the way that companies do for these video then really use it. Really use it. Look at people and give them a chance to sort of shine that way.
Well, thank you for taking the time to join us today. Where can people go to learn more about you?
Oh my gosh. They could go to our website is www.humareso.com. That's HUMARESO.com. Or connect with me on LinkedIn. I'm happy to pick up the conversation with anybody, so feel free to reach out.
Awesome. We'll include the hyperlinks to these places on the transcript over on Blogging for Jobs as well. Thanks for joining us today.
Thanks, Jess.